Welcome back to News Nexus. Today, we're diving into a topic that's been a hot discussion for decades and has serious implications for the future of our planet. It's called the tragedy of the commons, and it's a concept that explains how individual self-interest can lead to the collapse of shared resources. Sounds dramatic, right? But trust me, it's something we all need to pay attention to. So, let's break it down. What is the tragedy of the commons, why does it matter, and how can we avoid it? Let's go back in time to 1833, when an economist named William Forster Lloyd first introduced the concept of the tragedy of the commons. Picture this: a community of herders sharing a common pasture for grazing their cattle. On the surface, it seems like a perfect system. Each herder benefits from the shared land, and everything works out, until they all start to think like individuals instead of a collective community. Each herder, motivated by self-interest, decides to add just one more cow to the pasture. The more cows they have, the more milk they get, right? But as every herder has the same idea, the pasture becomes overgrazed. The grass starts to disappear, and soon it's not enough to feed any of the cattle. In the end, the shared resource, the pasture, has been destroyed by the very people who relied on it. The tragedy of the commons, in a nutshell, is a situation where individuals, acting in their own self-interest, overuse a shared resource to the point of depletion, and everyone ends up losing. Okay, so that's the basic theory, but how does this play out in the real world? Let's take a look at some examples that you're probably familiar with. First, let's talk about overfishing. The oceans are a shared resource, and fishermen, whether big corporations or small-scale fishers, are all trying to catch as much fish as possible. The more fish they catch, the more money they make. But here's the problem: fish populations don't have an unlimited supply. Overfishing has led to the collapse of many fisheries around the world. Cod in the North Atlantic, for example, has been so overfished that stocks have nearly collapsed. And despite regulations, illegal fishing continues, making things even worse. Next up, air pollution. Think about it. Air is a shared resource that belongs to no one but affects everyone. But industries and vehicles continue to pump pollutants into the atmosphere without considering the long-term consequences. And the result? We're seeing more severe air quality issues, health problems, and of course, climate change. It's a perfect example of how self-interest can harm the collective good. Then, there's deforestation. Forests provide so much value: biodiversity, carbon sequestration, clean water, but they're being cleared at alarming rates. Whether it's for agriculture, timber, or urban expansion, the drive for short-term profit is leading to the loss of vast tracts of rainforest, especially in places like the Amazon. The immediate benefits of cutting down trees are tempting, but the long-term costs are catastrophic for the environment. So why does this happen? Why do we keep exploiting shared resources, even when we know it will lead to their collapse? A big part of it is temporal discounting. It's the human tendency to prioritize immediate rewards over long-term benefits. In the case of the tragedy of the commons, people see the immediate gain of taking more from the resource, whether it's more fish, more timber, or more clean air. But they don't consider the future consequences, like the collapse of the resource they depend on. Another factor is the diffusion of responsibility. When resources are shared by a large group, it's easy for individuals to think that someone else will take responsibility for managing the resource. This lack of accountability leads to overuse because no one feels personally responsible for its depletion. And then there's the free rider problem. Let's say you decide to cut down on your carbon emissions, or maybe you reduce your fishing in a certain area to let the fish stock regenerate. You're making a sacrifice for the greater good, but others might not. They'll continue to exploit the resource, and you'll still feel the negative impacts. This undermines the whole effort to conserve resources, making it harder for everyone to act responsibly. Now, I know we've been talking a lot about the problems, but here's the good news. There are ways to tackle the tragedy of the commons. We don't have to sit back and watch these resources get destroyed. One solution is regulation. Governments around the world can step in to create laws and policies that limit the exploitation of shared resources. Think fishing quotas, pollution limits, or deforestation bans. These regulations set clear boundaries and force people to act within limits. However, enforcement can be tricky, especially in regions with weak governance or illegal activities. Another approach is privatization or collective ownership. While privatization may not always be the answer, especially for something like air, there are cases where it works. When people have ownership of a resource, they're more likely to manage it sustainably. For example, community-managed fisheries have been successful in some parts of the world because local communities have a vested interest in preserving the resource. Then there's the power of public awareness and education. If people understand the consequences of overusing shared resources, they might think twice before exploiting them. Education campaigns can raise awareness about the importance of sustainability, encouraging responsible consumption, and waste reduction. And when people work together to protect shared resources, it's much harder for anyone to get away with overexploitation. The tragedy of the commons is a powerful concept, but it's not a fate we have to accept. We have the tools and knowledge to prevent the collapse of our shared resources. Whether through regulation, collective ownership, or simply changing the way we think about our impact on the world, we can make a difference. So, next time you're faced with a decision that might impact a shared resource, whether it's the oceans, the air, or the forests, remember that the choices we make today will shape the world we leave for future generations. We all share this planet, and it's in our best interest to work together to protect it. Thanks for watching this episode of News Nexus. If you found this topic interesting, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Let's spread awareness and make sure we're doing our part to preserve our planet's resources for the future. See you in the next video.